Welcome to a new episode of the SBE podcast series, where we talk about currently and economically relevant topics with our network of academics and professionals. And today our guest here is Alex Hunns, and we're going to talk about tackling the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. Alex is a researcher at UNU-Merit, and he just came back from Afghanistan a few weeks ago, if I'm correct. Mm-hmm. So we talked about it before. Welcome here. I'm really, really happy that you could make time for this episode. And yeah, so can you tell us a bit about your background and how you got here, and what is your drive to actually visit these quite dangerous countries?
Yeah, well, thanks, Dory, and thanks for having us on the podcast. It's really nice to be able to have this opportunity to talk and share a little bit about what we're doing just up the road from here at Bosstraat here in Maastricht. So I've been in Maastricht for around, it must be more than 10 years now. I first came to do my bachelor's degree, then I got hooked and ended up doing a postgraduate degree here as well at UNU-Merit. And then I've been doing the job that I've been doing now for about the last 6 and something years. Mm-hmm. So Maastricht is something of a home. I originally grew up in the UK, just outside Manchester. And so it doesn't just have to be places beginning with M, but there does seem to be a certain trend there. And so in that time, well, actually, my first job when I got the job that I'm just doing now was to visit Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya, and it was a short-term contract, short-term assignment to do some data collection and analysis for an impact evaluation for a cash transfer that the World Food Programme were doing and are still doing in the camp there. And I think this was where I got, let's say, the bug. This is where I got hooked, and I found that not just seeing these places, which is already an incredible thing, because these are scenes that generally you don't see. The Kakuma camp is right under the flight path when you fly down to Nairobi. And I've studied it. I checked after I found this out, and I looked out the window and I still couldn't see it. It seems so big on the ground, and yet it's so tiny from where most people are, where you view this from tourists going on safari, and yet no one ever sees that. And so it's already incredible to witness. Really quite incredible scenes. This is a city of 250,000 people hidden up in the desert there on the northern borders of Kenya. But I also really found myself getting drawn into the way in which policies, governments, the UN intersect and interact to protect and promote lives and livelihoods in some of really the most challenging areas on planet Earth. These are areas where generally most people who have ever fled their homeland haven't gone far. They've usually gone over a neighboring country. So it's an area usually marked by some kind of insecurity, conflict, even if over another border. And it's really a privilege to be allowed as a temporary guest into these people's lives. We get to talk to and meet incredible people who sit and share their story with us and entrust us with their story. And it's a real privilege, not just for me, but for everyone in our team at UNU-Merit, to get to be trusted with that story and then to go out into the world and tell that story, to amplify their voices, because otherwise perhaps they're not heard very well. And that's what we do with our research. That's what we do with our UN partners. And that's what we're here to talk to you about today.
Yeah. And what is happening currently in Afghanistan? We've seen in the news before, but from your perspective in the humanitarian setting, what is currently up there? Yeah,
so I wish I could perhaps give you a somewhat positive answer. I wish I could paint a nice picture. And the first thing I'll say, this is a first of what we hope are many visits to Afghanistan. So this is a prelude, and perhaps you'll have us back again at the end of the project to talk about what we found. But the situation is not good. This is a humanitarian, the entire country is designated as a humanitarian area. Typically only sections of a country are designated such. So you've got really troubling rates of malnutrition, though this is beginning to stabilize. And this is not helped by the earthquake, you'll remember, that hit the southern provinces some months ago. And all around the country, and this is what we're really working on with UNICEF, is an incredibly difficult time to be a woman in Afghanistan, and it's a really difficult time to be a child in Afghanistan. And this is where UNICEF's mission is, of course, the United Nations Children's Fund. So really they're focused on on the most vulnerable members of our society, those whose agency is pretty much dependent entirely on others. That's where UNICEF is really stepping in. Some of the districts, some of the regions in Afghanistan have unfathomably high malnutrition rates as well as mortality rates. In some areas, there's really not good odds that you make it to your second birthday. So it's a privilege to be part of the response here, even in our own very small way to this. So the entire UN system is working hard to try and pump as much aid as possible in to keep basic systems functioning. And there's been some really good progress from some of our partners, but it's a really tough road to climb.
And for example, I think in many areas of the world, it's not hard to enter, to have an effective intervention. And how is it? Is it different in Afghanistan than it usually is around the world?
Yes, I would say that there are some particular challenges faced when working in Afghanistan. As you might imagine, security is one pretty important part of it. Of course, there are fairly, I guess, widely publicized, but I think you can probably fairly easily imagine some of the security challenges we might have working there. At the moment, things are perhaps more stable than they have been, but there are still pockets of conflict, active conflict, with various factions and parties. And this is, of course, a huge challenge. We work with an incredible team, and we've met incredible people in Afghanistan who are really going to do some incredible work in very challenging places. And yet there's still a limit to what we can ask people to do. And of course, another big problem is infrastructure, not helped, again, by the same conflict. And also it's a rather seismically prone part of the world. And so the fragile infrastructure that does exist can be, unfortunately, damaged further by the natural hazards. And right now, of course, we're facing nearly an unprecedented humanitarian demand globally. We've got conflicts, we've got disasters all over the world. And so the humanitarian budget is feeling lighter and lighter as there are more and more demands. So fighting for your piece of the pie in this humanitarian budget is a big challenge to aid agencies like UNICEF.
And how has UNU-Merit come into the picture exactly? So what is your work with UNICEF and in Afghanistan or in general?
In general, UNU-Merit, it's a relatively broad church. We're an autonomous organ of the UN General Assembly, as well as being partnered with Maastricht University, and we fall partly under SBE, where we are talking to you now. And we are a research and training. That's our overall UNU mandate, and UNU-Merit also looks at some specific areas. So we have a particular focus on comprehensive innovation, social and sustainable development, and part of that is the public policy and governance unit. And in that, we have a focus on social protection, and that's where I fit into this vastly complicated set of topics. And so UNU-Merit in this, we were chosen by UNICEF to partner with them to provide evaluation services. So it's really important when we're dealing with big projects like the mother and child cash transfer, which is what we're specifically looking at in Afghanistan. These are huge budgets. This is money from donors, from taxpayers globally, as well as other agencies, money that comes together. And this is not just important to provide accountability to donors to make sure that money is having the best impact it can. It's incredibly important to provide that accountability to those that we're trying to help. So are we doing the best that we can for people who perhaps don't have the agency and the voice to speak up, to be heard, and to negotiate for what they need in this incredibly complex environment in Afghanistan? So that's why these evaluations are very, very important, not just to the UN, but all over. So our team, led by Professor Franziska Gassmann, I'm joined by Professor Leonora Nilsson and Dr. Bruno Martirano, as well as me. We're the team from UNU-Merit that have been contracted by UNICEF to provide these evaluation services. So everyone's got their own little field of expertise, and we all come together to go and join the good fight in Afghanistan to help provide this accountability.
And you mentioned that there is a bigger budget needed to be real here. But what does UNU-Merit need more of? Is it budget only, or?
I think if my director heard this and I didn't say we'd love more budget, I think he might come after me with cross words. So I will say that this is the case. What we do at UNU-Merit is try and deliver the most rigorous and evidence-based policy research that we possibly can. So, of course, budget helps us do that research. We're always looking for funding opportunities. But I think what we need more generally is to be part of a conversation on how we use research, how we use learning, everything that we do, not just at UNU-Merit, but as well at Maastricht University and in the entire academic community, how we can best make ourselves heard and how the policy makers, the decision makers can integrate learning, how they can integrate research to make policy as effective and rigorously based as possible. So I think what we're really striving for is to have a world in which academics, researchers, and policymakers are broadly, at least, we can hope for, singing from the same hymn sheet. So how can we come together like that? So I think that's what we look for.
And to get a bit deeper into what are you doing in Afghanistan? So you said there is a cash transfer initiative. How does it actually work? And it also, you said it happened before. So how does it work?
So UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Fund, their imperative is to look after children, and there's a renewed focus right now on the first 1,000 days of life, because all research shows that this is absolutely a very strong predictor of the rest of your life course. You're not generally aware of your first 1,000 days. I tried to think about it. I don't think I was, so that's probably a good thing. But those things that are happening really to you, because your agency, the fulfillment of your rights is largely dependent on others, is incredibly important. And so UNICEF, reflecting on the really challenging picture that the statistics are painting of the situation of being a child in Afghanistan and being a pregnant mother. Of course, generally your mother and your parents in general are almost entirely responsible for giving you that start in life. So UNICEF has decided to focus there. They are working with their partners to deliver a cash transfer. This cash transfer is unconditional. There's no strings attached. They will receive hard currency Afghanis. And the idea is the program theory of change is that this cash influx will have some kind of price or income effect on the purchase of a varied and nutritious diet, as well as the uptake of optimal feeding strategies. And this cash transfer comes as well with social and behavioral change communication. So there will be great teams of local implementing partners from UNICEF going around helping communities to raise awareness and to change behaviors on things like accessing healthcare, making sure that pregnant mothers are getting the right antenatal care, the right postnatal care, and that the children themselves also attend the clinics and get the care they need, so that when there's a need, there is the drive to then go to the clinic. And of course, this is quite challenging in Afghanistan. So this is only part of a package of works. So as well, not just UNICEF, but other organizations as well are supporting the delivery of health services. Because of course, I can want to go to the clinic, but if there is no clinic, unfortunately, only 50% of the bargain has been followed through on. So this is all part of a broader scheme on the reconstruction of these basic services in Afghanistan now.
And why the cash transfer? So why not getting food there or doctors? Why just cash?
And that's a really good question. So obviously the part of the overall UN strategy is to make sure there are not just doctors, but culturally relevant healthcare. So Afghanistan is a relatively, or parts of the society adopt a very conservative interpretation of religious norms, which means that healthcare delivery is not just so simple as a doctor. It must be the right balance within the team, the right gender balance. So there are challenges there as well. And again, it's a lot to ask people to go to some of these places. They're very remote, very rural, hard to access. And so there is some element of challenge there. But more on your point on the cash transfer, more globally, we're seeing a bigger and bigger shift towards delivering cash rather than in-kind aid. It's not to say that in-kind aid, so that's giving packages of food or parcels of food, sacks of grain. You will have seen in the last few weeks the airdrop of food into Gaza. This is perhaps the image that people conjure up in their mind. And it's true, in-kind aid still plays a huge role in making sure and supporting that basic food consumption in some of the world's hardest hit locations. But the general conversation is cash offers a degree of autonomy. So households get some choice. They can meet their idiosyncratic needs because, of course, your household need is not just cash. You might need other things. You obviously need to clothe yourselves. You need to make sure that your kids can get to school. You can purchase medicine. And as well, of course, we can try and find food that's on average acceptable. But if you've ever, I don't know if you grew up in a large household, but even finding one meal that everyone in one household will meet is a bit of a nightmare. So trying to find that balance of exactly what people in a household they'd like to consume and the right culturally relevant food is a big challenge. And of course, UNICEF Afghanistan, they can't really, at the moment, it's not possible to support much domestic produced food aid. That is a model that the UN is sort of increasingly implementing globally. So we're reliant, they would be reliant on donors. And then you're at the whim of what the donors can provide at any given time. And so while, when you're very hungry, rice is rice perhaps, but cash gives you that opportunity to buy exactly what you would want. So you can meet more of that household need and your cultural preferences. And it's also about dignity. It's we find in studies that we've conducted all over the world, including our own studies in Dadaab refugee camp and Kukuma refugee camp, which are on the borders with Somalia and South Sudan and Kenya. Respondents really quite strongly said that cash gives them a sense of dignity and autonomy. And of course, this is really important for the UN. We're not in the business of trying to take away that decision. We're trying to give them lives that they have cause to value in there. So that's why cash is quite important. And of course, all of this is based on assessments. So it was found that the market is very likely to be able to support this cash transfer, that there's going to be a sufficient ability for the market to respond and to provide those essential commodities that people are expected to buy. So that's why the UN is looking at cash in this context.
So you tell me that there is food supply, there is enough to go to the grocery store. I don't know how it actually works, or farmers market, because we are here in the Netherlands. We just, I don't know, go to Albert or somewhere. But I guess it's a bit different in Afghanistan. And also it comes then the question that can it create inflation later if you just introduce like a large amount of cash into the system?
Yeah, of course, that's a really relevant point that you raised there. There are usually fears and there are checks that the implementing partners do to make sure that we won't cause adverse effects. So, of course, if you are in a very, very, very remote area, perhaps there's a drought going on, and you give money to purchase food, the intention of purchasing food, you might create this. Perhaps it's not enough to create a national inflation effect, but you can certainly potentially cause a local price effect. And we have all sorts of really highly qualified teams that do these kind of market assessments before a cash transfer. And they say that the sensitivity of the market is likely that the supply chain will respond in a timely fashion to not create that inflationary effect. And there have been studies conducted all over the world that say that have found that if there is an inflation effect, it's incredibly small and transient and doesn't last particularly long. The market tends to adjust pretty well. So in Afghanistan, they found that there would be the right response from markets, and of course some of these households that will receive the transfer are in urban areas. So they will go to a shop or a supermarket. I'm afraid they didn't accept my Albert Heijn bonus card while I was there. Too bad.
Not,
No, I tried, but you've got to try. But it's more urban. But then you have some households that are also doing partially their own production as well. So in those areas, you generally have some kind of either market in perhaps traditional sense of money exchanged for goods, and there might be a degree of bartering going on. But it was found that in the provinces that we're looking at, it was an acceptable response. But this is something that we take very seriously, and we do check before before that's feasible. For example, last year, the year before in Kenya, there was an area that we were visiting, or my colleagues were visiting. I was in a hospital bed, leaving them to it, that could not support a cash transfer. So the UN changed in certain areas the modality to suit exactly where we were trying to reach, to make sure that we don't accidentally cause more harm, because of course the principle is do no harm. So we really have to make sure that we're doing that properly.
Well, it's very hard when it comes to intervention. And so the beneficiaries, are they also willing to spend the money so what it's intended to be spent on?
Most of the time, we find that beneficiaries are exactly the right people to know what they need at any given time. And this is now not speaking for the UN. Personally, I find that cash transfers are probably the best way of providing this assistance, with certain caveats and limitations, as we've discussed. But they're generally pretty good at knowing exactly what their household needs. And so we find that in evaluations we've done in the past, household spending has been pretty much as we expect it, purchasing mostly the staple goods, food that you need, food, water as well, to get through the month, as well as then spending partially on things like school books, school uniforms, medicines, these essential things. I mean, globally, the body of evidence says that most of these cash transfers, and there have been experiments done in countries from, Finland to Argentina, to pick the most northerly countries and southerly countries that currently come to my head, have generally found that people spend it on essential supplies to meet their household needs.
And you also mentioned that UNU-Merit is there to help policy builders or policy building itself. And what are the big challenges when it comes to policy building? Why is it so hard?
Globally, or
even for projects or for countries. So for what is in the portfolio of UNU-Merit?
Yeah, so we, our mandate is very narrow. We are just here to sit in our little, I'd say ivory tower. It's more like a concrete tower here in Maastricht, and conduct this research as and when we're invited and requested. And we've got a good relationship with ministries within the Netherlands, as well as actually more locally as well here in Maastricht. And we work then as well with governments around the world, and we have worked with governments around the world. And usually, I guess people think of policy building as grand debates in Parliament, which does look like good fun, and I wish that's what we did more of, but they won't let us. So it's more building that relationship with policy communities and making sure that our research is disseminated. But of course, making policy, you're trying to bring together the agency, you're trying to bring together actors with their own agendas, their own path dependency as well, and you're trying to create that little window of change, that tiny window that you can just seize and make that tiny change. So these are like these giant oil tankers. It doesn't turn nice and responsively. You can sit and spin the wheel for a 1 degree turn. So that's what we're looking for. It's just making sure that turn that we are making is the right one. So it's, of course, it depends on the context and the country. But it's making sure that the right voices are heard at that table, to make sure that our policymakers do have not just the ability to use that research, for example, that UNU provides, and we don't have a monopoly on global policy research, but to make sure that they are aware of it and they can use it effectively in their debates, in their policy building. And this is with national governments as well as in areas where, let's say, the UN is perhaps the larger provider of policy. This might be in specific areas like refugee camps, where UNHCR holds the mandate for what goes on in the camp, as well as in areas where the government has asked the UN to step in and provide technical assistance for some particular parameter. And this is how it works. The UN is asked to step in these certain circumstances. So we work with people all along the chain.
But I assume that in Afghanistan it hasn't happened that way, right?
So of course the UN still operates with the blessing of the de facto authorities, who then give their consent, and they of course have to consent to programs that the UN wants to operate. So there's a relationship there where the UN will come with this, for example, a cash transfer. It could look similar to the mother and child cash transfer, and they then work with the de facto authorities to say this is what we want to do. This is the reason why we're doing it. This is the support we need. This is what we need from you, and this is what we're going to deliver to these people in this region. In some cases, this is rather broad, and in some cases, they're extremely specific programs. And that depends on the agency. So UNICEF is just one of many agencies that are in the response in Afghanistan or comparable other contexts as well.
And you mentioned that there is a big humanitarian crisis. There are many women and girls that are like little boys, babies. They're suffering from that. And why are they not fleeing their country? So from the Netherlands, it would seem so rational, just leave. But why is it not happening there?
I mean, I suppose one side to say is quite a lot of people did flee. I think I checked the UNHCR statistics before I came out, and Afghanistan is one of the largest single sources of international migrants globally. So I believe there are about 6.1 million Afghans outside their country. This is, of course, the minority. There are still more inside Afghanistan than outside, as you would expect. But it's not easy to cross a border. I think we're both sitting here. I don't think either of us are from the Netherlands. So for us, it was an incredibly easy decision to cross a border. I came for a degree. I guess you probably did the same. And for us, it was a simple decision. And our networks, the policy framework that we live in, but as well our social networks allowed this. This was a relatively, doesn't always feel like it, but a relatively easy thing to do. That choice to flee in say the context of Afghanistan is very, very different. When you flee, most people that flee their home country only go over the border into a neighboring country. So in this case, Pakistan is one of the biggest hosting countries for Afghan migrants, asylum seekers and refugees. Of course, the policy that they extend to you as you flee over the border is a huge determinant of your willingness to flee. And then, of course, what happens to you when you're over the other side of that border? So there are so many factors that go into it. But as well, again, for us, the cost is low. But research has shown that when you choose to flee, when you choose to leave home, either as a migrant or as an asylum seeker wanting to become a refugee, that network that you have at home ceases to be the same. There might be feelings of resentment. There might be feelings of jealousy. I'm sure there'll be some that wish you well as well, of course, you would hope so. But it's never quite so simple as just picking up and going over the border. There are all manner of tribulations and trials. There will be those that try and hurt you on the way. Unfortunately, sometimes refugees fleeing are the target of those that would wish harm. Whether militaries or whether insurgent groups. So unfortunately, that's a big risk that people face as they flee over the border. And it's not just that. Many of these conditions are harsh. Afghanistan gets harsh winters. This is a real risk. And in some places, it's the opposite. You're looking at an extremely arduous, hot journey with the resources that you can carry on your back and the goodwill of those that you find along the way to help you survive. And unfortunately, there are many that don't survive the journey. And from our perspective, I guess we have a pretty good idea of what it takes for me to leave where I started from to get where I am. There you have only really what you've heard, and you might see perhaps slight irrational patterns of how people are moving because you hear from those that went before you that this way is dangerous, you have to take this way, or this is the way I know, because you might as well be dealing with, and this is not specific to Afghanistan, this is now general, you might be dealing with perhaps clan conflicts or ethnic conflicts. That means the most logical way for you to go is not open to you. You might have heard that there is hostility to you fleeing along that path, so you'd have to take a different path. And this means that the mental pathway between you sitting at home thinking, gosh, we need to flee, and actually getting somewhere safe, there are any number of obstacles that stand between you and their, not just those that threaten your life, though there are plenty of those. It's what life will there be? Will we all make it? Do we have to choose? Do we have to leave someone behind? Those that are maybe less firm, it must be, and I hope, I'm not going to knock on wood because I think it'll upset the sound guy, but hopefully we are never in that position where we have to think about that and have to go through those decisions, because it's incredibly hard. And there are, of course, on the other side, there are those that really want to stay because they believe that staying, they can build their life, they can build a better life, they want to be there.
Or you feel safer.
You feel safer, and perhaps you feel that you want to help grow a country.
Your home.
It is your home. So.
It's a quite hard decision to make, because it's also like you're not just dealing with yourself, but in case of women with children, it's also like, what is the best for my children, and they are like way more vulnerable on the road. So I can imagine that it actually makes it is more rational to stay in many cases. And you mentioned before that there are some donors also, of course, and also the taxpayers. But are there any like private sector like companies or players in the scene that are actually like strategically entering not just Afghanistan, but like these kind of areas to help, or if they can seek maybe investments there and seek profit from that? So is it happening anywhere?
Yeah, I would say, to my knowledge now, the way that the private sector is involved in Afghanistan is through implementing partners in the precisely in the humanitarian response. So, for example, UNICEF works with, for example, private sectors to deliver things like the cash transfers. That's the same, for example, in Kenya, where the telecoms giant Safaricom is really instrumental in providing the cash transfers through Kenya's M-Pesa system. So you find that the UN really works throughout with private companies to help deliver particularly things like cash transfer, where either telecoms or private financial firms, I think they call them money service providers, are really quite instrumental. At the moment, the situation in Afghanistan is probably a bit fragile. I'm not directly aware of those that are brought in, but in other contexts, there's a big role that you can envisage the private sector playing, or they're currently playing. In Kakuma refugee camp, which is on the border with Kenya and South Sudan, IKEA was looking at how they can install these kind of solar lampposts. They've got a small battery on top, so it tremendously dark up there. Great for stargazing, but not great if you need to move around it safely. So they were experimenting with that. There's now I forget the name of the company. I'm really sorry. I did look this up and I've forgotten. That takes the plastic waste, and there's quite a tremendous amount of it generated in a refugee camp, because of course almost everything you get in terms of water is in a plastic jug, unfortunately. And they turn that into things like bricks and sandals, flip-flops, for example. Unfortunately, my friend bought me back a pair and I've since lost them, which is a terrible shame. I have to go back and get some. So there are ways in which this kind of, I want to say entrepreneurship, this kind of spark can help bring in and attract capital. And this can, of course, transform lives. This can provide employment. It can provide, I think, perhaps what most of all we would perhaps describe as hope, as aspiration here, that there's a pathway you can live this somewhat normal life, and that it feels rather alien in some of these places. Sometimes it feels a bit like they're liminal spaces. The famous French philosopher described them as places of non-lieu, non-places. So they can feel a little bit like that. So these things help to normalize, and there are, I mean, perhaps not on the grand scale of where we are in the School of Business and Economics, but smaller scale capital, perhaps on a regional scale, for example, to do fish farming or some kind of agriculture. These are really important things that people can help to rebuild their lives and to feel that connection, and of course to provide income, in the case of agriculture, a better source perhaps for your diet.
So money is coming from UN and its affiliates, of course. But then which kind of, so is it coming from locally, from the private sector, for example, or is it like globally, or the big, like really big multinationals are present, or where is the money usually coming from? I don't know if you have information on that.
So usually when we do some kind of humanitarian programming, for example, there's UN OCHA, the coordinator of humanitarian responses. There are individual calls. They will rally donors, they will rally countries, but they will also rally what are sort of anonymously called private donors. And we don't really know much about them. So they could be anybody. They can be corporations, they can be companies, they can be individuals. Sometimes they prefer to stay under the radar, so we respect that. And that provides the input that the UN can then turn into its humanitarian programming. They might do cash transfers, delivery of hospitals. Then you have those organizations with a very specific mandate. I don't know, say the International Committee of the Red Cross or the Red Crescent, depending on where you are in the world, has a very narrow mandate. We're going to do this to provide hospitals or Médecins Sans Frontières to doctors. And others have a slightly broader remit. So it's how we can best use that money to deliver our overall objective, which is perhaps food security, it's perhaps nutritional status. So there's some liberty in there. But then the UN might reach out to partners to provide, for example, look at how we can build, let's say, employment markets where employment is permitted. What can we do there? So, for example, how we can build more sustainable housing, because of course this is when you're dealing with humanitarian situations, you're often dealing with either people who have fled, you don't tend to bring your house with you, or those in temporary situations, for example, after big natural disasters, your house is very likely, unfortunately, damaged. So the private sector can play really an essential role in how to respond with what you need at the time that you need it. So providing, it could be anything from building materials for the rapid resupply and restocking. So the UN works with everybody through this Office of Coordination, and then each national mission will then work with, could be internationals, it could be local, could even be very local firms, on how they can best draw together the skills and the resources. For example, not just in Kakuma, in general, IKEA was involved in how we can rethink and make more sustainable humanitarian shelter. So I think I want to say they were in Turkey and Lebanon doing that, but I have to check that. So there's a role for every step in the ladder to play, and of course the appropriateness of that will depend on the situation you're in. It's very hard to say carte blanche like this would work, but everyone's always exploring the best possible situation where they are.
But when we talk about like private sector, are they there to like because of goodwill? So it's basically charity or donor, or is it more like, can we actually expect a positive return on investment there? So like, for example, like impact investment funds or like big companies, now it's more like with ESG and everything, it's more like a tendency to do like strategic move, even when you're doing like impact, it should be aligned with your strategy. And there, like, because it's also for stakeholders, it's not a good thing to say like, yeah, we spend all the amount of money to charity in Afghanistan, for example. There might be stakeholders that don't like it, or shareholders that don't like it. And do you think that there are some areas that it's actually profitable to enter there, or what are like basic fundamentals that you need to meet to have such an investment there? Yeah,
so I mean, it's a good question. I think that there's always a fine balance to be struck, because we need, often these humanitarian places are pretty isolated and pretty on their own. But ironically, they're also a large group of people. And unfortunately, the statistics show that once you become a refugee, there's a good chance you stay a refugee for quite some period of time. Often in the same place. So we've met refugees that in Kakuma and Dadaab refugee camps, for example, that have been there, I think, nearly longer than I've been alive, which I won't disclose how long that is on the airways because I don't like to admit it, but it's quite some time now. And so you're really looking at quite long-lived places. In other humanitarian settings, it's transitory, it's a phase. And so exactly how that works is a little bit different each time. So, for example, now there's a drive in Kakuma and Calabai, particularly in Calabai on the next to Kakuma on the border with South Sudan. They've decided to turn this into an integrated settlement. So there's an economic development plan. There's now changes in the national legislation that changes how refugee perhaps qualifications and the right to work is recognized. There's more infrastructure, and the national regulatory framework is changing how that can be viewed, which not totally, and we have to be extremely cautious in how we say this is positive, but there is now scope, for example, for the plastic processing plant to be set up and provide that employment. And that is, I've not looked into their books. I don't know if they're turning a profit or not, but it's certainly it's certainly running as though it were this kind of, but we've shown in recent research, for example, that these refugee camps tend to be highly exposed to climate hazards. And that's generally because they're in quite isolated, remote places. There's a lot of both internal politics as well as external politics that, for example, determines where a refugee camp is located. So that generally doesn't follow the optimal strategy for where you would choose to put a city of 250,000 people. It's not to say it never happens. It can be done. And there are good examples of how this does work. And in some cases, it's transitory. So eventually we have to believe that Afghanistan may, let's say, rebuild itself after the many shocks and conflicts that it's been through. And there, you can hope that, for example, private sector can move in and provide employment, provide stable, good quality employment. And of course, this is where our good friends at the ILO come in to make sure that the work that we are generating, that we are trying to bring in is of good quality, it's safe, it's secure, and because of course, this is the best kind of work.
And just focusing more on like your personal experience when visiting these areas, how do you feel, for example, in Kabul? I think like many of us now are going to go there. So what is it like there currently?
I found it a really incredible experience. The first thing you notice when you have to change planes in Dubai and you fly sort of up the border, sort of Iran for a bit and then for Pakistan, and you're flying over incredibly empty, beautiful desert with shifting colored sands. You come in and you fly through the mountains. You see sort of the edge of the Hindu Kush off to the right, and it is truly stunning, incredibly beautiful. And then you land in a city, and in some ways, it is beguilingly normal. There are people selling pomegranates and cauliflowers on the corner. There's a guy trying to sell you a mobile phone case on a big sleeve of them on his arm. And in some ways, it's so incredibly normal. And then in absolute instant, it's not. And I mean, we've traveled to some of the more interesting parts of the world, and there it's perhaps what you expect. It is really a desperate situation there. It is an extreme climate. It is extreme deprivation, and that's very obvious from where you are. But Afghanistan, and Kabul in particular, was beguilingly normal in some ways. There's a burger joint next to a shop purporting to sell plane tickets, next to a plumbing supply store. But then there's a crater in the road and the wall blasted back where a truck bomb went off not long ago. And it goes from a city that really could be anywhere in the world to chaos, to explosion, to gunfire. And you really feel that can happen in an instant. So it's a bit like when you're watching the divers or the swimmers come up at the Olympics, and there's that fine layer of water just between their face before the surface tension breaks. And when it does break, the world rushes in. That silence, that stillness when you're underwater, the muffled, perhaps you can hear a little bit through the water, and then it comes roaring into life as you're exposed to that. And so we found an incredible group of people in Afghanistan locals that we met with, the partner that we're working with, the data collection agency that we're working with there, men and women who are putting themselves with every single day that they're there at some kind of risk. And they are absolutely committed to helping to deliver high quality research that can really help build better policies for their own country. We've worked with great men and women in the UN who took the call to action, left behind their family, left behind their friends, picked up everything and moved to Afghanistan to do exactly to exactly this, to try and rebuild, to try and provide this kind of essential aid for some of the world's most vulnerable people.
Yeah.
And that's really incredible. So, and in many ways normal, many ways not. But everyone we met was incredibly warm-hearted. Got nothing bad to say about the pomegranate juice. It was delicious. And we were very well looked after everywhere we went. But you're aware that in an instant that can change.
Yeah. And when you go to these kind of places, how is the accommodation or like going there looks like? So somebody must be waiting for you there.
Yes, we are always well accompanied by the best bulletproof steel that certain Japanese car makers can produce. And there's, of course, strict security protocols that we follow, not just to keep us as an individual safe in that instant, but in general, the security of the mission. We stay in compounds in this kind of place, which are incredibly well fortified or incredibly well looked after. And then inside these compounds, there is another little world going on. There's hairdressers, banks, beauty salons to get your nails done. I managed to lose the entire ability to move my neck while I was there. It completely seized up. My boss found it hilarious that in meetings I had to twist my whole body like this to turn around. I managed to get a deep tissue massage in the middle of Kabul in this compound, which is great. There's restaurants, there's shops that are selling everything from an air fryer to imported Indian spices to pasta sauces from Italy. So you can find anything you want in this shop. It really does sell an incredible amount of things. And then you have the accommodation quarters, and these are staff that live there. I mean, they are there on contracts for usually between 4 and 8 years, but you go on rest and recuperation every now and then to unwind because you can't obviously bring your family to this one. This is a non-family duty station, so they get to go off and spend time with their families. And the accommodation is really quite nice. You get a little studio apartment to yourself. It's got all the amenities that you would need. Even in on the remote borders with, for example, Somalia and Kenya, there's a great little spot for you to live and unwind. Of course, you feel some degree of guilt that you're living here.
It must be so weird.
No, it's incredibly difficult when you drive in off the main road and through all the security procedures. You pop up into this other little world. And so that really takes some getting used to. I think maybe I'm slightly jaded and cynical now. I've kind of got used to it over the years. But I do remember the first time going into one of these humanitarian compounds and really not understanding what just happened. Did I go through a magical gate? Has something happened here? But of course, then we have different compounds that the UN has all around the country, and all operating on a similar principle. So the key is to make sure staff are safe and able to do their work, because I'm told that dead researchers aren't much use.
Well, I'm a finance student, so I must ask, how big is the market in a compound? So it's a bubble, a different kind of market. Like, how many people are living in these compounds? And then, how many potential customers are there?
There's in the UN office in Afghanistan, I did ask someone, but we're talking, there must be well over 1,000 people living in this place. And there's a good market. There's usually there's a couple of different shops or restaurants that will compete against each other, and they really know how to get their market. They build loyalty incredibly quickly, and they make sure that it's well stocked and you're well looked after. So there's a great choice of food, drink. Obviously, Afghanistan, not drink, but there's always something good, and everything from homeware to imported different types of food. So for people who've never been to a compound, Gassmann, does it feel like more like entering an airport? It feels like, I can buy whatever here, even though I'm in Thailand or in, Africa or in the Netherlands? No, there's usually a pretty regional theme going on. The notable exception is the pizzeria in the Kabul compound, which does stand out perhaps a little against the others. But then the others, they're usually run by locals that have the license to come in and open this. So you can get some good local flavors. Some of them the shops will make sure that certain common international products are stocked. an absolute king at forgetting my shampoo and shower gel every single trip without fail. But you're always well stocked with Head and Shoulders. But then most other things you can get, it's usually very good. But perhaps mum's spaghetti bolognese is not on the menu.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. I can imagine. And I also want to ask one thing regarding these compounds. I just forgot. But do you have one story from all these travels that really remember it, that is like it was quite funny or unprecedented in your work? I
don't know. I think every place that we've been has got its own story to tell, and we've met, some really quite incredible people that you meet around the world. I think that, what can I say? There was, one in Kabul the other week. We were driving back from the office that we'd been visiting, and traffic there is quite intense, and you are really cut and thrust through. But we were following a vehicle from the de facto authorities, and we're in a big, high armored car, and our driver was a bit too focused on seeing whether there was a car in his blind spot. He hadn't noticed that the de facto authority car in front had stopped, and we came very, very close to rear-ending a minister in the de facto authorities, which I can't imagine would have gone down particularly well.
Wow.
So like everywhere in the world, you can be in a place that is perhaps the stuff of myth and legend it's always been a place that's interesting to me ever since I grew up. Afghanistan, what it is, this incredible place that is part of history, the incredible role that part of the world played in knowledge in the sort of 6th, 7th, 8th centuries, and how it still plays this mythical role, and yet traffic and having a fender bender in traffic can still be your number one concern, but with a slight fear of who you may have just rear-ended in front. But I would say that the most incredible thing wherever we've gone, both on the side of UN staff and the people we meet, is just how normal life is after that initial shock. You meet people who have a fantastic way of adapting, and I think the resiliency, not of this poetic stuff on the resiliency of the human spirit and all of this, is usually the resiliency of a sense of humor and the way in which life just carries on exactly as normal after about 5 minutes of adaptation. So cracking jokes with colleagues as you have dealt with incredible situations all day, playing Monopoly and board games and card games at the hotel, which is just a tree with the word hotel carved in it in the Dad compound. The way that in the evening, in these compounds, particularly in Dadaab, that they will start to play music very loud to bring everybody in together. And you are in a perfectly normal bar with a tennis court next door, with a gym, with air conditioning, with good food. And then you remember where you've been all day and just how normal everything is, how normal those relationships are. But the brethren and the kinship you find with those people lasts a lifetime. So,
wow. Well, that's a really nice ending note for this episode. I think there must be so much more work to be done in these areas. I think it's like it's a good resource for you. I guess your work is going to be needed for quite a long time. So thank you very much. We hope not, but also on the other side, this is how life goes usually, and so thank you very much for coming in. And I really, really much hope that we can also have other guests from UNU-Merit, because I think these are topics that are really well hidden, I think, from university students, even from people who watch or follow the news. It's hard to get these stories out. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having us. We're happy to talk anytime. And of course, not just our great team within the UNICEF Afghanistan project, but throughout UNU. So come and visit us if you're in Maastricht. So.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Dorian. Bye.